trends. I'm your host, Pramod Sharma. Today we're talking about driving, and we'll be looking at driving outside the box. Our guest is Tomas, who is the founder and director at shifters.ca. Welcome, Carlos.
How are you doing?
Great. Now, in a sentence or two, please describe what you do.
I help drivers to master a manual transmission, essentially. I help people be able to get into trucking courses, to be able to take the dream trip in Europe, to rent a car, or to be able to buy the sports car of their dreams. Most people in North America learn to drive with an automatic transmission, and so I help them make that transition from automatic to shift.
Okay, and are many people using a manual transmission these days? It seems that with coffee cups and texting, you need more hands than we have.
Well, there's a group out there, it seems like there's a small percentage, probably about 10 to 15%, somewhere in there, of people who will always gravitate to a manual transmission.
It's that high a percentage.
Yeah, I've heard people say that if BMW stops making that car with a manual transmission, that's just one less car that I have to select from when I go out and buy a new car.
Okay.
So I imagine there will always be manual cars. Even though some manufacturers may phase them out, there's still people who always will want to, they're always fascinated by that. I've got a client right now who just inherited an old protege from his grandfather, and I asked him.
That's the Mazda protege?
The Mazda protege with a 5-speed, and I asked him, I said, is your grandfather giving up driving, or is he buying a new car? And he said, no, he's buying a brand new Honda. And I said,
okay.
Is he buying it with a stick? And he said he will only drive a stick.
Most of our viewers would have automatic transmissions, and what we'll be doing is asking you some questions that will help drivers of all kinds. You talk about driving outside the box. Would you mind explaining what that means? Because I normally think that you'd want to drive inside a box.
Sure, there's 3 aspects that I've identified that I consider boxes, or 3 types of boxes that we as drivers can easily find ourselves trapped in. First one, and this is the first box that everybody that's ever learned to drive is going to be trapped in, is the car itself. And there's a point in their driving where they begin to see things outside the car, but initially they're very much inside the car. They have to look down at the gears, they have to look at when they signal, they want to look at their pedals, they want to look at...
Right, I remember that. Yes, I have to look and, okay, I don't want to press the brake pedal by mistake. Let me make sure that I know where my foot is. Okay.
Then there comes other things. There comes other aspects of it. When they're driving in narrow situations, they want to compare themselves to the parked car. And do I have enough clearance between myself and the parked car? And of course, that becomes a problem when you're driving on a narrow street and you've got an oncoming vehicle and a parked car, and you cannot see both sides at the same time.
Right, because I remember when I started to drive, I was told that you have to focus on where you want to go rather than on the car that's in that lane, because if I look at that car, then I may end up hitting that car.
Exactly. Or you'll overcompensate to give them so much space that you'll end up taking out your side view mirror on the parked car.
Right, okay. Well, I've forgotten some things about driving. Okay, so that's inside the box.
That's inside the box. Outside the box means that you are measuring that gap that you're about to drive into using that oncoming vehicle as a measuring stick. If that oncoming vehicle fits in that gap, I fit in that gap. We're all about the same size on the road, varying a few inches. Even a Hummer is not 3 times wider than your car, or twice. It's only slightly wider than most cars. So if you're measuring the spaces using the vehicles that are there, that puts your mind outside of the box, outside of your car.
Okay, so that's the first
That's the first
part,
one.
and then what's next?
The second one is what I consider allowing yourself to get boxed in traffic situations, traffic scenarios, which means you've placed yourself in a position where you have very little option to move if something goes wrong.
Okay.
So for example, drivers will continually drive in packs of cars. They will often drive beside another vehicle without any thought. They will often drive behind a vehicle that cuts off their forward visibility, so they're unable to plan far enough in advance. They will allow people to follow them behind, sometimes even unaware, and combine that with possibly a cyclist beside you. You have in effect closed yourself off in a box. So now all you need is a spark to ignite.
Right, because what I worry about if I am too close to the vehicle in front of me is that if they put their brakes on suddenly, then even if I'm able to stop fast enough, the car behind me may not. So I get really uncomfortable when I'm boxed in. Is that common, or do people tend to not notice these things?
People often don't notice. There's a percentage of drivers that are aware of that. They're naturally uncomfortable in that kind of a situation. They feel
Okay.
there's a sense of claustrophobia when you're in that. If you're on the freeway and you're beside a transport truck, you know you're vulnerable. You know you've heard of tires coming off cars and items falling off of trucks, and so you want to be in a position where you minimize that risk. You can't eliminate it. Mother Nature is there. We have earthquakes. We have all kinds of stuff that we can't do anything about. But take care of those items that you can do something about,
Right.
and you reduce the risk drastically.
Okay, and then so that's how you go outside the box, is by being aware of those constraints.
Not allowing yourself to be in a box.
Okay.
So you're basically allowing yourself lots of room to see, lots of space around your vehicle. And the third box I like to refer to is the box that we call the rules of the road. The rules of the road are there to keep us safe. They help us to determine in any given situation of potential conflict what is the proper behavior, who's responsible for what, who's on first, who's on second.
Okay.
How do we handle this potential conflict? Unfortunately, some drivers will take those rules to such a literal degree that they will actually put themselves or allow themselves to be in a risk.
Can you give
situation.
us an example?
Well, one example might be that if you've got, let's say you're driving on a snowy road, for instance, and you're approaching a stop sign where it's clear all around, and you've got somebody coming up fast that's not slowing down.
Okay.
Now, you can obey the law and come to a complete stop, and most likely you're going to get pounded from behind, or you may abort the situation by possibly turning right or getting out of the way. That's probably a far-fetched example of something, but people often fail to share the road because they feel entitled to the space between the dotted lines as their space, and often not taking into account things like opening doors of vehicles, cyclists that have to pass. And so as an oncoming driver to that type of a situation, you naturally accommodate and allow for those types of situations so as to minimize the risk, so as to share the road. So sometimes people can get so hard fast about the rules that they forget the common sense aspect of it.
Right. The way I look at it is I would rather be safe than right.
Exactly.
But sometimes traffic is going faster than the stated speed limit. and it seems safer to just go the same speed as the cars around you. But then, like, if you get a ticket, then what's your justification? I was speeding because other people were speeding?
Well, to a certain degree, there's a certain amount of leeway in there. What is dangerous on the road is not speed per se. And sometimes I see signs and slogans, I've seen all kinds of them say speed kills. Well, if that were true, then anyone who's ever raced an Indy race would be dead.
Good point.
But it's not speed itself, it's the difference in speed. It's the difference in speed between you and other drivers, you and the tree,
Okay.
you and the guardrail. So if you can maintain the flow to as close as possible to the regular flow of traffic, you are in a sense reducing the number of passes. The slower you're going, the more people that are going to pass you. Every time someone passes, there's increased risk. Now, obviously, if everybody decides to go 200 kilometers an hour in a 100 zone, we have a problem. You may want to choose a different route. But generally, that's not the case. Generally, people will tend to gravitate to a certain speed, and that's been proven statistically over decades. You know, they've changed speed limit signs up and down, but the average speed tends to remain about the same.
Right, in the US they used to have the speed limit of 55, and then Sammy Hagar had the song I Can't Drive 55. And I think there were probably a lot of other people who found that was too slow when they were used to going 60 or 65.
Yeah. I think the focus on speed and the authorities that are out there, I mean, speed is very measurable, so it's a very easy way to hand out a ticket. But in terms of risk, you have to ask yourself, is it going 60 in a 55 zone or 120 in a 100 kilometer an hour zone? Is that the problem? Or is it when people bunch up and don't have enough space to maneuver at those speeds? If we look at the German highways where they, on the Autobahn, you know, they're driving 220, 240. At 170, I feel like I'm driving slow.
Okay.
And I've got the space around me, but I'm watching Mercedes after Mercedes, 2 car lengths apart at 220, zipping by.
Okay.
So now when they have crashes, they crash 50 cars, 100 cars, sometimes more. Usually several deaths, because they will keep those kinds of speeds in situations like fog.
Okay.
So is it the speed, or is it driving in a box?
Right, you've given us a lot of things to think about, Carlos. Now, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Probably by email through the website info@shifters.ca, or my phone is 416-921-7845.
Okay, well, thanks for visiting us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Tea at Taxevity. The Taxevity Insurance Advisory helps you understand insurance and bridges gaps in your coverage. There's no premium for peace of mind. How healthy is your insurance?